We are seeing what appears to be Donald Trump's motorcade leaving the courthouse right now. We know things have finished up because we were able to get Garrett Hake in front of a camera, which means that the court was no longer in session. So we don't have a date for Donald Trump. We do have a date for Walt Nauta. Do we have a date for when they're going to discuss a next date? Do we have a next step that has so far been set?
No motions, nothing of the sort that I can point to right now, Katie. I mean, that's one big difference from here in the New York case. It's not going to be the same judge who's overseeing this. Remember, Aileen Cannon takes over this case for the next steps. I mean, we really just had that arraignment, initial appearance, and what amounted to a bond hearing today for the majority of the time we were in the courtroom. But Judge Cannon's going to take this over, and I think the next steps will come from there.
Give us a little bit more color about how Donald Trump was behaving during this process.
Well, I can do that best comparatively. I was in the courtroom for his arraignment in New York, too, and in that case, the reporters were seated before Mr. Trump came in, and we got to kind of watch him come in and take it in. In this case, he was already in the courtroom by the time we came in. He was seated with his two attorneys, in this case, Chris Kise and Todd Blanche, who had come with him from New York. From the moment we walked into the room, he looked somewhat irritated to even still be there, arms tightly folded across his chest. He would lean over periodically and talk with his lawyers. He never looked over his shoulder, never looked around the room at who else was in the room. It's interesting, this is, again, in two arraignments now. Nobody from Mr. Trump's personal life has ever been in these rooms. Not a family member, not an aide, not anybody but his attorneys representing him in these cases. So you saw him kind of look back and forth a little bit to the two lawyers he was talking to, but never even turned his head all the way over his shoulder at the time I was in the room to see Jack Smith, the man he's been trashing on the campaign trail for the last several days, sitting a couple rows back. I will say, you know, the security presence was also at least a little bit less noticeable in this hearing than he was in the New York hearing. But I made a point of noting that Smith now has a pretty sizable security detail with him as well. The kind of threat environment around this clearly high enough that it's not just Donald Trump who has to take his security very seriously when it deals with this case.
Thank you for confirming that Jack Smith was there. Ken Dillingham believed he recognized Jack Smith, but he couldn't quite tell from the small monitor that he could see in the overflow room. Police are trying to physically clear people off the road right now. There are literally no barriers between the sidewalks and the SUVs. They literally were physically trying to clear people from the streets, as you saw. I imagine this is going to get discussed later on about whether this was truly a secure scenario for the former president of the United States when we were in New York watching his state arraignment. A lot of the